Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our discussion of the French Revolution. All right, so I know this upload is late, but I was like slammed with stuff to do this weekend and stuff like that. So you are in luck. This bad boy is only going to be about 15 minutes. In about 2 seconds, I'm going to clip in the flip from last year where we discussed the financial crisis and the impending Estates General and things like that, right? So go ahead and pay attention, do your thing, watch it up. I'll see y'all soon. Well, I don't think he's a hero or anything. I'm sure he's like racist and so like not a positive person in a lot of ways, but he's an interesting figure that we get to talk about a lot. So also the last but very not least cause of the French Revolution, probably the biggest log on this fire that would bellow itself into a massive big deal has got to be the financial crisis that's going on, right? So like the absolute inane financial crisis that's occurring is, bananas. So, couple of financial crises also with this, a famine. The French revolutionary citizens were having trouble harvesting crops. Famines were running rampant throughout all of France, and bread was actually like not even available. So you've got hungry people with no money, which is going to lead to this.
No dessert? Oh, sure. We'll eat our dinner right after you eat this. Get off of me! Computer read right here.
Let's just be calm for 1 second.
Exactly, right? So the thing about it, though, going forward is, let's talk about that financial crisis, right? So why can't the French government help the French people out who are going through a famine specifically and directly? Well, a lot of it is because guess where 50% of their tax money was going? So I don't know if you understand how loans work, right? So like a lot of these countries during this time period were indebted to each other, right? So like the French government had a lot of money that was given directly to them by other governments so they could go off and fight wars, right? For example, they borrowed a heavy amount of money from Spain. They borrowed a heavy amount of money from their other allies, from Austria and other people like that. There's this thing about loans where you have to pay this thing called interest, which interest is money you give the person for allowing you to take the loan, but it doesn't help pay off the loan at all, right? So for example, if I loaned Claire Kirsch money to buy a new chicken, right? So like, and she was like, give me $10 to go buy a new chicken, and I'll be like, okay, fine, but I'm gonna charge you 1% interest, right? That means she has to pay me a dime every month for just allowing her to have that. 50% of the French tax money paid off just the interest on their loans. The interest, just the interest. That's it. So they're not even paying towards these loans. It's so bad. And then also 25% of the money is going to maintaining the military. That's 75% of all their tax money going to these two different places. 75% as interest on loans and the military. That's bananas. All right, so like that is absolutely ridiculous. And if they just would have upped taxes on the nobles and the clergy, they could have solved a huge issue right here. Now, 6% of the money is going to maintaining the court for the royals, right? Maintaining Versailles, paying for the royals, giving them money and things like that. Now, to give you an understanding, if we took 6% of the money of the modern American tax amount and gave that to just the president, it'd be $440 billion. So, like, you have to understand that 6% is a ton of money of the French, like, tax monies that they're collecting every year to be giving to royals to have parties, right? And so 19%, the other little bit of, like, the money is just left for everything else, to help with the famine, to help the people, to pay off debts and everything else. So this is impossible. No, it is not possible to fix the issues of France with 19% of the tax money. That's insane. The fact that you thought at any moment that 19% of your tax revenue was going to fix a famine, the growing gap between the urban poor and the bourgeoisie, the growing gap between funds to fix the issues with tax credits and tax monies. You're insane. But here's the thing about it. Was Louis XVI aware of this? Of course he was, right? So like he was aware that he needed to find money someplace else. So he actually did have several different attempts to fix this whole thing, right? So one of those big ones was this thing known as the Assembly of Notables, right? So the Assembly of Notables happened in 1787, where the old guard of the French financial advisors, it's this guy and this guy, which I can never remember what their names are. It's not Maurepas, but he's like he's the French advisor to Louis XVI during the Assembly of Notables, right? So the earliest Assembly of Notables was called by the French financial advisors And they were like, let's get a bunch of the members of the First Estate and a bunch of the members of the Second Estate in a room together, not in a parlement, and try to convince them to go out to the other nobles and the clergy and convince them to pay taxes, right? To convince them to up their tax money. The Assembly of Notables was a miserable failure. The Assembly of Notables, all those representatives left, not agreeing whatsoever to any upping of tax money at all, right? So the big thing about it, though, is what's going to happen after this is, again, the press is going to go nuts. This right here is a political cartoon from the Assembly of Notables. And this right here is a wolf who represents the monarchy, and these people are supposed to represent the First and Second Estate. And what does a wolf do to like birds and stuff? He eats them, right? So this starts running wild throughout all of the the newspapers, and basically the question says, how would you like to be cooked, right? So like the big thing that happens is a lot of the nobles of the Second Estate and the members of the First Estate are literally like, oh no, we're not paying doodly squat, right? So like, and they refuse. And so what ends up happening is Louis XVI fires his old financial advisors and brings in a very important figure. This guy, a Swiss financial advisor. This dude's election after the Assembly of Notables is very key in the progression forward of the French Revolution. His name is very important. Go ahead and jot this down. So, but after the Assembly of Notables fails, blank is hired as the new financial advisor. His name is Jacques, spelled Jazqueus, Jacques, which is like actually the name I proposed for Pierre at first, but Maria was like, no. So like Jacques, and his last name is Necker, Necker. So Jacques Necker gets actually elected to be the new financial advisor of France. And Louis XVI goes up to him and he's like, how are we going to fix this financial situation? We are falling further and further into debt. We are crumbling at the seams. The Americans aren't paying us back. What should we do, Jacques? Please tell me, what should we do? And Jacques decides to call something. This meeting had not been called since 1614, and the year is now 1789, and Jacques Necker says, Louis, we have to call the Estates General. So what the Estates General is it's this meeting of all of these privileged individuals that have to show up and try to solve the financial crisis of France. Basically, it's an emergency parliament, right? So it's the first time this thing's been called in 173 years. So in 1789 it gets called, or in 1787 it gets called technically, and they start preparing for it. And so in 1787 they begin to call the Estates General, and it hadn't been called since 1614. But what the Estates General is that Jacques has this idea for is he's like, let's call them because it's a representative body that's only called during a time of crisis, right? When public opinion, it was completely necessary, because what they needed to do was they needed to have a huge meeting and a huge showing to get the press to stop eviscerating all of the nobles and royals and to try and bring this tension down a little bit, right? And so this representative body was called, and it literally does not even get off on a very good foot. And the big thing you need to understand about it is the way it works, right? So the way the Estates General works is that the First, Second, and Third Estate have assemblies of representatives that have been picked by their estates, right? So it would be like, hypothetically speaking, if like we've got, I don't know, like if when I'm standing in front of class, so the Dakota Como side of the room would be the First Estate, so they're the clergy members. The empty area in the back is going to be the Third Estate. And then on my right side, we've got all the nobility, which is like McKenna's side of the room. And so y'all are the Second Estate, right? So y'all would assemble into this hall, and Louis would be sitting up in front of you. And the way it would work is the huge problem. There are three representative bodies. They each only get one vote, right? So like, the First Estate gets a vote, the Third Estate gets a vote, and the Second Estate gets a vote. How is this already unfair going into this entire thing? The problem is that who's going to win every single time? The First and Second Estate. Because they're already showing that they have no intentions of actually, they have no intentions to pay more taxes. So this Estates General, the way it's set up, is actually really, really dumb. And so complaints were running rampant out the gate, right? And I'm talking about crazy amounts of complaints. And do me a favor, underline the complaints and ask me in class, Sabito, I know you're listening, ask me in class, be like, Mr. Terry, what were some of the other complaints about the Estates General? And we'll talk about those things more a little bit forward as we go. But this is what the Estates General looked like when it was assembled, right? So the complaints are crazy, and it's very insulting to the Third Estate. And the Estates General finally starts in 1789 after those elected were politically different amongst each other, right? So like the big thing about it though is the Estates General started off going pretty well. It started off going pretty well. The early agreements include, like, that they thought absolutism was lame, right? So, like, even the first and second estate were like, yeah, the absolutism concept's kind of dumb. We should definitely maybe have a constitutional system or have a document that outlines the powers of the kings and stuff like that. They were like, monarchs are fine, but constitutional monarchs are way better, right? So that's an early agreement. Another early agreement is like, let's do away with mercantilism. Mercantilism's dumb, right? Like, so let's get rid of guilds, let's get rid of all that stuff, and let's go to economic liberalism, like Adam Smith outlined, right? So do away with all that. Another big one. In a document, let's grant some personal liberties, right? Even the first and second estate was like, yeah, freedom of religion probably is a good idea, right? So, like, and they were also like, freedom of speech is probably a good idea, and grant personal constitutional laws to the people of France, right? So that's all fine and good, but the disagreements are the things that derail the entire Estates General, right? The biggest one is voting procedures, okay? So you have to understand the way this whole thing works. Since they only get one vote, a lot of these early, a lot of the representatives are like, this voting system's dumb. We demand that you double the third, right? So, like, write that down really quick. Double the third, okay? See representative numbers, doubling the third. They were like, why are we going to try to agree on paying taxes more if those two are going to beat the third estate every time in this goofy voting system when we only get one vote? And another one was meeting procedures, right? They were like, you are insulting us every day we start this thing because of the way the procedures go. The third estate has to file in last. We're not allowed to wear fancy clothes. We're not allowed to wear black robes and blah, 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 blah. They have a lot of big meeting disagreements. But the representative numbers is the biggest one that the third estates won. They were like, look, let us have more representatives than everybody else because there's more of us in France, and give us 2 votes rather than 1. All right, so we can at least come to a tie that can be broken, preferably, right? So the double the third principle is very, very important. So as you can see, everything was going fine until taxes came up, right? And so when taxes came up, everything got really, really intense. And we're starting to see, though, the dissent of some of the other members of the first and second estate. This moment of the double the third concept, which we'll talk about more when we come back to class, the double the third concept sends waves throughout the entire Estates General. And some of the first estate members and some of the second estate members start looking at the third estate and they're like, man, I think they're right. I think that they have legitimate complaints. I think this is screwed up. I think we have been taking advantage of them the whole time. And all the while, Louis just sitting up front going like, and just literally minding his own business, right? There's this whole event called the Hat Fiasco we'll talk about a little bit later on. But the big thing that comes out is a pamphlet. And a pamphlet was written by a first estate member, a man by the name of the Abbé Sieyès, right? So do me a favor really quick, write his name down. Abbey, and then Sieyas. The Abbé Sieyès is a member of the first estate because abbey basically means bishop or cardinal, right? An abbey is like a religious figure. He was a priest, and he wrote a pamphlet. And that pamphlet was called, What is the Third Estate, right? See, as you see, croissant les tiers estate. So, so basically what it's saying is, what is the Third Estate? And he writes this entire pamphlet of, oh, they're this, they're this, they're this, they're that, and he ends the entire thing with the Third Estate is everything. They are everything. They are our economy. They are our government. They are our base. They're everything. They're our parishioners. They're the people that work for the second estate members. The Third Estate is everything. So that pamphlet of what is the Third Estate becomes a huge thing that sends ripple effects through this entire meeting, as you can see, and it's going to lead to a lot of dysfunction, and it's going to make everything even worse, okay? You could say that the Estates General was the stick of dynamite that if it just stays safe, the revolution won't happen. But that fuse keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter every time they can't agree on something. And it's going to get real short when we talk about it in the next class. Because this guy right here, Jacques Necker, who's standing in front of the Estates General, cannot get the man sitting up here, Louis XVI, to help these people or agree on anything. And things start getting crazy, okay? And we'll talk about the craziness in our next class, and I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a great weekend.